I'll bet you hadn't heard of Alaa Abd El-Fattah until yesterday, unless you're a keen Star Wars fan. He is an Egyptian activist who was involved in the Arab Spring in 2011, who was imprisoned as of February 2015, served a 5-year prison sentence and was let out in 2019 for unlicensed protesting, and then was re-imprisoned in 2021 for the dissemination of false information. You know, that crime that pretty much every Western government wants to impose upon far-right activists for talking about things like lockdown or mass migration. Well, they couldn't stand the fact that he was imprisoned in Egypt, and so there were lots of MPs in Britain, members of the House of Lords, members of the press, Amnesty International, lobbying for his release for the last 4 years. Here we have Layla Moran, who is a Liberal Democrat MP for Oxford, who in 2022 sent a letter to then Foreign Secretary Liz Truss regarding Alaa's unlawful detention. And the reason they were so concerned about this is because in 2021, Alaa, who is an Egyptian citizen, applied for British citizenship. Now, his mother was born in London in 1956. He was born in 1981 in Egypt, and that was the year that Margaret Thatcher repealed birthright citizenship. But by lineage, he was eligible to apply for British citizenship. And so, while he was in prison, he became a dual British and Egyptian citizen, something that we should end. So suddenly he became our problem, and now he has been released. He has been, people are saying returned, but brought to Britain. And this is a cause for celebration for our entire political class who've been trying to do this for a long time. And his presence in our country is a stain on all parties, a plague on every house. We have here Nima Parvini's old friend, Alicia Kearns, saying, relieved British citizen Alaa Abd El-Fattah has been pardoned by President Sisi back in 2025, in September of 2025, saying his release is long overdue and I pay to his mother and sister tribute who have fought non-stop to get him free. Now he must be returned home to his child in Brighton who needs their daddy home. Returned home. He's an Egyptian who was only a British citizen in 2021 while he was in prison. Why is this our concern? Same goes for anti-white racist James Cleverly, who celebrated the election of Kemi Badenoch as saying, finally the Tory party is not pale, male and stale, unlike Labour. In 2022, James Cleverly said, last night I spoke to the sister of Alaa. We will continue to work tirelessly for his release. So this was a real concern for our political class. And this was such a concern for our political class that while David Lammy was Foreign Secretary before he was promoted to Justice Secretary and is now looking to abolish trial by jury, which was cemented in the Magna Carta and Bill of Rights, thank you, Calamity Lammy, 107 MPs and Lords signed a petition for Alaa's release from an Egyptian prison in December of 2024. What a Christmas gift for the country. These include, of course, the likes of Diane Abbott and Shokat Adam, one of the independent Muslim MPs, Natalie Bennett. It includes, of course, Saida Vorsi, the former chair of the Conservative Party, now an independent Muslim baroness, who also wants to bring Shumaima Begum back to the country. It includes Devouring Mother and my arch-nemesis Stella Creasy, Magic Grandad, Jeremy Corbyn. We're seeing Syrian Duncan Smith even on here, for which he will answer for later. So Conservatives, Liberal Democrats, Labour, Lords, MPs alike. And it's been the concern of multiple governments to get this man into our country. It's also been the concern of multiple celebrities, as Charlotte Gill shows here, of Mahershala Ali, who has nothing better to do after Wesley Snipes came back in Deadpool and Wolverine and ate the lunch of his Blade movie. Emma Thompson, who's stopped sitting in big pink boats in the middle of the road with Extinction Rebellion, probably because her private jet couldn't get off the tarmac to fly back to London for the climate protest. Bill Nighy. Man, he's fallen so far from Davy Jones. And other people, Cynthia Nixon, Judi Dench, Yanis Varoufakis, who took time out of his day recording a podcast that nobody watches on Unheard and ruining the Greek economy to agitate for an Egyptian revolutionary to come to our country. Basically, all sorts of people for whom virtue signalling has no cost, who think, I'll just jump aboard this bandwagon of a cause, and this won't come back to bite me in the arse. It won't inflict any cost on me whatsoever, but it will on our country. It will on the people that are funding all this. And so now he's been returned home, and the likes of David Lammy, who is now the Justice Secretary, has been celebrating the fruits of his hard work, delighted that Alaa Abd El-Fattah has been reunited with his family in the UK. I thank the government of Egypt for this outcome. And clearly there was a text doing the rounds in the ministerial group chat because Yvette Cooper, who was the Home Secretary, is now the Foreign Secretary, said the same. I'm delighted that Alaa Abd El-Fattah has arrived in the UK and is with his family. Might want to put a pause on that delight for a little while. Seems someone that did was Shabana Mahmood, who curiously hasn't tweeted about this. She has found the time to posture about being tough, returning illegal immigrants to Namibia and Angola, who are responsible for basically none of the illegal migrants in the last few years, whereas her home nation of Pakistan has had lots of people exploiting the asylum system, but absolute silence on that. But curiously, she didn't tweet about Alaa coming over to the UK, and it's not like she's been busy celebrating Christmas, and so can't tweet. Perhaps she's keeping her powder dry because she knows that this government is the least popular on record and that Starmer's time as Prime Minister isn't long for this world. And so she doesn't want to be tarnished with the mistakes of the rest of the front bench, because, don't worry, we'll get to Mr. Alaa's incompatibility with our country very shortly. Of course, the Right Honourable Member for the Forest Moon of Endor was also celebrating this. She, in January, stood outside Downing Street with Layla Suefi, who is Alaa's mother, who apparently did a 109-day hunger strike. Now, if you didn't eat for 109 days, you'd be dead. So let's translate this. Alaa's mum skipped lunch for that third of a year, and this caused a bunch of MPs to join with her to pose for photo ops. And now Afsana Begum is saying she's so pleased that Alaa is not only free but reunited with his family in the UK. He's an Egyptian man. Why do you want him here? It seems to be that you will ally with anyone who is not from our country and who seems to have contempt for the people from our country. And of course, Philippe Sands, KC, the lifelong friend of both Keir Starmer and Lord Hermer, the lawyer who took the side of Mauritius in the Chagos deal and made it so that we now have to pay Mauritius billions to take the Chagos Islands, even though the Chagosians didn't want it. We've got the Diego Garcia military base, which is of great strategic importance on it. And Mauritius are allies with China, which is ostensibly one of our enemies. Not that the Labour government would know that. But Philippe Sands, he's been supporting Alaa's return to the country, so surely Lord Hermer would have known about this too. And so did Keir Starmer, of course, because Keir Starmer invited Alaa's mother to Downing Street. So all you've got to do is miss a few meals and you get an audience with the Prime Minister, apparently. He also mentioned the case in June on a phone call with President El-Sisi of Egypt. So this has been a high priority for our politicians for quite some time. And so Keir Starmer celebrated the fact that Alaa Abd El-Fattah is back in the UK. He says back, he's not actually, from here. And he also says he's delighted. I don't think he's too delighted, though, with the fact that his post, and David Lammy's and Yvette Cooper's, got community noted with the following. Alaa Abd El-Fattah has a history of anti-Semitic comments. In November 2012, he wrote that, quote, "There is a critical number of Israelis that we need to kill." In 2010, he tweeted, "Yes, I consider killing any colonialists, and specifically Zionists, heroic. We need to kill more of them." Obviously, disavow any calls for violence against innocent persons, because it's wrong by Christian standards. But Starmer should have known about this, because he won a literary prize, Fattah, in 2014, the Sakharov Prize for Freedom of Thought, and it was withdrawn after the discovery of his tweets from 2012, where he said he called for the death of a critical number of Israelis. So this has been known for about 10 years, and any ministerial brief, which was, the paper it was written on, would have featured this in a report as to whether or not this man and his presence in our country is in the public interest, is a matter of being part of the public good. And you could just sort of read Fattah's published work, because he's written a lot of essays on progressive topics, to have known this, because he addressed the fact that the prize nomination was withdrawn back in 2014, and he said, "I was not surprised when a new tarnish campaign was launched in reaction against my nomination. My family has faced such campaigns before by supporters of the Israeli occupation and the Israeli apartheid. The tweet in question is certainly shocking if taken out of context, but even then it cannot be framed as a call for anything. It was a mention to two friends, part of a private conversation, a thread spanning multiple tweets, that took place over a public medium limited to 140 characters, on the first night of Israel's 2012 attack on Gaza. Yes, I'm sure an appeal to context would have spared you jail if you had tweeted this in the aftermath of the Southport murders about, I don't know, stabby Africans and the children that they happened to kill. I'm sure that if Lucy Connolly would have just argued for this, she would not have found herself on the sharp end of two-tier justice for her tweets and social media posts. It's also very important for everyone to remember, by the way, because we also tend to memory hold this now that we live without the yoke of censorship on X, we still live with it in the Soviet states of Great Britain, that this was not during Elon's Twitter. This was during the previous ban-happy Twitter regime. So they didn't warrant calls for mass murder and violence as something worthy of censoring or suspending his account for. No, these tweets have been up until very recently when he started to delete them. But don't worry, people have been screenshotting them. And again, he appeals to context. He says, to pretend that you can interpret this tweet 2 years later without consulting the people involved in the conversation and to claim that it constitutes a call to action is simply ridiculous. Okay, if you didn't have a pattern of calling for violence along ethnic lines, maybe you could be afforded charity by the gullible and ethno-suicidal. However, you do have a pattern of doing this. I mean, for example, he said, I consider killing any colonialists and specifically Zionists heroic. We need to kill more of them. The police are not human. They don't have rights. We should just kill them all. Random shooting of white males should convince them racism costs lives. I'll switch to something else, advocating killing police, hating white people, assassination plot against Saad el-Din Ibrahim. Also, declares himself to be an avowed anti-white racist, which, again, calling for the killing of Jews, abhorrent by Christian standards, but for native Brits, it's pretty concerning that this anti-white racist, this murderous revolutionary, has been brought into our country at our expense, and that our MPs and celebrity and media class have spent so much time and attention agitating not just for his release from prison, but for his ability to live in Britain alongside people that he hates with a sort of murderous ethnic resentment. He says, by the way, I'm a racist, I don't like white people, so piss off. The British fooled us and gave us bad land, where we then exploited the Egyptians to work in the land for peanuts. So the brilliant British, dogs and monkeys, really think terrorists will reveal their plans on Twitter. You're telling me British history is not pure BS? Do they tell them about how they enslaved a fifth of humanity, massacred millions? Turns out he's not a big fan of the British, given the fact that he wants to live here, around them. And then, again, given he's Egyptian, not a big fan of Jews. Not shocking when you've got Mein Kampf and Protocols of the Elders of Zion on sale at train stations there. Why are we importing 1,000-year-old Middle Eastern blood feuds into our country when they don't need to be here? Turns out our political class really want it. Again, he's just got this constant pattern of anti-white vitriol. Oh, I only hate whites, he tweeted. Also, quote, effing hate white people. They don't understand sharing or community. A blight on the earth they are. Good thing they stopped breeding. Why was it of the utmost priority for our entire political system to bring this man into our country? I can only conclude that they also hate white people, or that they are all so incompetent that they jumped aboard a bandwagon that is now coming back to bite them in the arse, and therefore means that none of them are capable of governing or representing us. They are either willfully endangering the lives of every native British man and woman by bringing such people into our country, or they're so stupid that their incompetence is indistinguishable from malice. In either sense, they're unfit to govern. And a number of other screenshots. In December 2010, I'm proud of being racist against whites. He said, once again proves humanity will not be redeemed until we commit genocide against all white people. Some of my best friends are white. I'm really glad that you've put that disclosure in parentheses. Otherwise, I would have thought that you wanted to kill me and all my countrymen. I feel so at ease now. He also wrote somewhere else that the mistake of South Africa was not retributive mass violence against innocent white people. So clearly has a post-colonial ethnic grudge against all white people, not just the British, for their time administering Egypt and, giving them things like Greenwich Mean Time and working plumbing. And then, like a character from Camp of the Saints, he tweeted, "Oh, don't worry, we were only discussing how we'll take over your town and RAPE, your women. Us terrorists tend to do that." You know, when people say stuff like this, I tend to believe them. So why on earth are our government insisting on importing another anti-white revolutionary terrorist with dreams of murder and sexual violence against us? This should be a disqualifier for everyone involved in this, and they should be permanently expelled from public life. But doesn't seem they're going to be. We haven't even got a retraction from the government yet, despite this being the national scandal. And also, he's in support of suicide bombings. So we're just going to get more jihadist attacks the more men like this we import. It's just that this guy's really high profile. It turns out that if you just take a random sample, like, you know, when you used to have those squares that you would just throw into field and count the number of daisies for your GCSE biology exam, if you do that for the third world, you get a lot of violent, low IQ, low impulse control, anti-white terrorists. And it just so happens that this one has a Twitter account where he is posting in English. He was also posting, though, in Arabic, so I did see some people saying, well, why was he just posting in English? This is an op. No, he was also posting in Arabic, and he said, "If we can't kill the officers, let us find a terror cell to kill their children and torture their mothers." This man is now in our country. You know, in hindsight, when he posted things like, "I seriously hate white people, especially those of English or Dutch or German descent," I don't know, man, there might have been a few warning signs there. Also, bad news for Keir Starmer, he's not a big fan of gays, either. And so, former Conservative leader Sir Ian Duncan-Smith, one of the signatories on David Lammy's letter in December 2024, has clarified, "I have campaigned for some time for the release of two British citizens, Jimmy Lai and Ryan Cornelius, who have been detained for years on trumped-up charges and denied a fair hearing. I have worked alongside others and called on the UK government to demand their release. I do, however, regret signing the letter calling for the release of Alaa Abd El-Fattah, given his views that have since come to light are utterly abhorrent. Had I known of these, I would not have signed the letter. I urge the police to investigate the nature of these extremist comments. I will continue to campaign unequivocally for the release of British citizens Jimmy Lai and Ryan Cornelius, who should both be released." Right. I'm not saying they shouldn't. I'm saying, Ian, if you think that you should be in a position of authority, because at one time you were leading the Conservative Party and wanted to be Prime Minister, do you not think that you should check what the people that you're advocating for bringing into our country believe first? Do you not think that maybe you should have verified they don't have murderous ethnocidal intent against you and your countrymen before advocating bringing them in to our country and making them our problem? And I'm happy for him to be rotting, spending the rest of his days in an Egyptian prison on whatever trumped-up charges he has had, because one, it's not our problem, two, he hates me and wants me and my countrymen dead, or worse. So, too late, I'm afraid. You thought it was easy to advocate for these kinds of causes, that it would have absolutely no political blowback, that the costs would never fall on you, and actually now they have, because the Uniparty is tainted by advocating for having this man in our country, and the costs have fallen on us, and we're angry about it, and so your party will probably never be elected again in its current state. You can't wash the stench of the crimes you have inflicted upon us by your complacency and your virtue signalling off, ever. Sorry for the break in continuity. I was midway through editing this video after recording, and Alicia Kearns put out the following tweet. She responded to the El-Fattah fiasco, and this proves right here why our country is in such a state. Our entire political class is retarded. Reminder, she has the safest Conservative seat in the country, right? Her response to this was, "Those of us who campaigned for Alaa Abd El-Fattah's protection and release as a British citizen, circa 2021, plainly were not aware of his grotesque tweets, and at no point had anyone raised them with me until yesterday." Right, so no civil servant did their job. You didn't do your due diligence. You didn't investigate the reason why he had that award stripped from him. And so we're just meant to trust you to be in charge of the country, and you're, bidding to become the next government. We're meant to trust you to run anything, let alone a bath at this point, while you are admitting your complete top-to-bottom incompetence for years. Moving on. "I trusted the process to give Alaa citizenship, and then supported the campaign for his release. So you outsourced all of your critical thinking capacities to a bureaucracy, and now you want us to put you in charge of reforming said bureaucracy. No. I feel deeply let down and frankly betrayed, having lent my support to his cause, which I now regret. Of course, Alicia, you're the victim here. It is wholly improper for British citizens to be detained without due process by foreign states. His British citizenship means nothing. Having a passport given to him by a treacherous government does not make him as British as you and me. But it gets more delusional. However, Alaa must unequivocally apologise and make clear he now wholly rejects the hatred and anti-Semitism he expressed, which is so wholly incompatible with British values. British values are delusional liberal fiction that allow you to virtue signal and feel better about importing millions of people who are from wholly incompatible cultures from the third world into our country and then assuming the scales will fall for their eyes and everyone will just rub along nicely together. There is no Scout's pledge that makes you British, and breaking that Scout's pledge, even if it were in place, does not come with any consequences, as is proof by Mr. Al-Fattah here, demonstrating on the internet over 10 years of virulent anti-white, anti-British hatred and violent rhetoric, and having loads of MPs, including Alicia Kearns, up until apparently yesterday, campaigning not just for his release from prison, but for him to be brought to Britain so he can mill about in Brighton, presumably writing progressive essays at taxpayers' expense. If you think that we are going to be foolish enough to entrust in you as a political class again, when you have just admitted here that you are at best completely retarded, and at worst have no ability to distinguish between us, natives, and foreign revolutionaries who hate us because of the colour of our skin and historical grievances, if you think that we're going to put our faith in you when you're admitting that you're stupid, you're living on another planet, love. So what are the political conclusions we can draw from this? Because it's all one thing to just complain about it, but how do we move forward? What do we learn? How do we reverse this situation? Well, the first thing to learn is that the Board of Deputies of British Jews, an organisation that I have criticised in previous videos, and it's caused me to have a lot of public and private backlash, actually, but I stand by my insistence that it's ultimately suicidal for Jewish advocacy organisations to push multiculturalism on white Christian countries and insist in the same breath that Islamophobia is as bad as anti-Semitism, because the Board of Deputies did an anti-Semitism report in the summer and there wasn't one mention of Islam or Muslims, despite them going on, of course, to gun down Jews on Bondi Beach and in a synagogue in Manchester in October. Instead, they just advocated for the Leviathan state to expand its equalities laws, protections for Jews, and to censor people that it said were being anti-Semitic. Well, this time around, it looks like regime change might be coming on the Board of Deputies. We've already seen them dismiss 30-year-old allegations of racism and anti-Semitism directed at Nigel Farage, the total smear job that the BBC have been trying to do from his school days. And now, curious wording. The Board of Deputies, noting the social media history that has emerged from Alaa Abd El-Fattah, has said it is of profound concern. His previous extremist and violent rhetoric aimed at Zionists and white people in general is threatening to British Jews and the wider public. The Board of Deputies just came out against anti-white racism. I mean, that's a surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one. Lots of people will say, quite late, but we don't know if this is different people in control of the Board of Deputies, because they do elect new representatives. And so it is very telling that the political direction is moving toward recognising the virulent ethnic hatred that emanates from the Third World and those imported from it towards the native white majority population, as well as Jews. Because a lot of the headlines around Bob Villan at Glastonbury and even this situation have been about his appalling anti-Semitic comments. The same with the community notes. And again, nobody should be killed for being Jewish. But it's just as important that he really, really hates white people. It's actually more important, given that he's going to be in Britain, because the only reason that Jews could live peacefully in Britain is not abstract values or international laws. It's if the Christian host majority, native white Brits, liked them and wanted them here. And so if those Christian white Brits become a persecuted minority in their own ancestral homeland, well, the Jews can't live here either. And so the sort of Danny Finkelstein idea that we can all just be liberal individuals, that Muslims and Jews can just get along, can form a coalition against the white majority of whom they must be suspicious because white people perpetrated the Holocaust. And we can never remove people who hate those white people and also who hate Jews from the country because they've got British citizenship, they've got British passports, they're as British as you and me. Looks like that's on the way out for the highest profile Jewish organisation in Britain. That's fascinating. They haven't advocated for stripping him of his citizenship and deporting him. However, that is the necessary measure. And we can just do that, by the way. So this is a screenshot from the page of a new report by the left-wing Runnymede Trust, the same organisation that introduced the phrase Islamophobia to Britain after it was invented by the Muslim Brotherhood, circa 1997. This page shows the executive powers the Home Secretary possesses to unilaterally strip people of British citizenship if their presence in our country is not conducive to the public good and if they are eligible for citizenship elsewhere. And even if they aren't yet, the Home Secretary can still do it and leave them stateless pending citizenship elsewhere while they appeal that decision. As is pointed out, in 2002, the Nationality, Immigration and Asylum Act extended the deprivation powers to those born British as well as naturalised and registered citizens, provided they had another citizenship. The 2006 Immigration and Asylum Act further lowered the legal bar for being stripped of citizenship. The 2014 Immigration Act, for the first time, allowed citizenship to be removed from naturalised Britons with no other citizenship who had done, quote, anything prejudicial to the vital interests of the UK, provided the Home Secretary had, quote, reasonable grounds for believing that the person is able, under the law of a country or territory outside the United Kingdom, to become a national of such a country or territory. This is the precedent that allowed Shamima Begum, the ISIS bride, to be stripped of her British citizenship because she didn't have citizenship elsewhere, but Bangladesh has a by-blood citizenship law, so she was hypothetically eligible to be a Bangladeshi citizen, and so was stripped of her British citizenship while in a refugee camp in Syria, full of ISIS fighters, by then Home Secretary Sajid Javid, and this was upheld by the Supreme Court because they didn't hear her appeal after the High Court upheld the ruling. So we now have the precedent to just denaturalise and deport people if they're eligible for citizenship elsewhere, or if we can broker a deal with another country that means they will take them as a new citizen of their country, if they are the sons and daughters of immigrants from, say, India or Pakistan, for example, which don't have by-blood citizenship laws, but which we can use our considerable leverage in the form of visas and remittances and foreign aid to ensure that they do take back the foreign nationals and sons and daughters of immigrants that we don't want in our country. Same goes for Egypt, for example. We could denaturalise and deport Al-Fattah and rid ourselves of this problem. As they point out, in 2022, Section 10 of the Nationality and Borders Act allowed for citizenship to be revoked without those affected being notified, and in 2025, the Deprivation of Citizenship Orders Effect During Appeal Act, passed by the Labour government, further expanded these powers, preventing people stripped of their British citizenship from exercising their rights as British citizens, even after the courts have ruled that the Home Secretary's actions were unlawful. A person successfully challenging their deprivation now does not get their citizenship back until all appeals by the government have been exhausted, a process which can, and often does, take many years. So, depriving someone of citizenship, repealing it, denaturalising and deporting them, is an executive power now enjoyed by the Home Secretary. So the fact that the current government aren't doing this by the millions shows how much contempt they have for us. But it does also show that a government with sufficient courage to do so, a government which also wants to repeal things like the Equalities Act, abolish the Supreme Court, repeal the Constitutional Reform and Governance Act to fire obstructive civil servants and rehire the Home Office full of true patriots who want to get remigration done, can just do this stuff. We can just return millions of people to their ancestral homelands if we don't want them in our country. If they're committing crimes, if they're claiming welfare, if they're recreating the conditions of Lahore or Lagos or Islamabad or New Delhi in various towns and cities across Britain. And so we can do this with Al-Fattah. And multiple Conservative MPs are starting to realise this. They're either trying to separate themselves from the previous government that they served in and tried to do good in and were thwarted, or were elected in 2024, like Katie Lamb or Jack Rankin here, and so aren't tainted by the record of that government. And Rankin writes, Al-Fattah is just not British, is he? That's what it comes down to. He is only British in the administrative sense. A passport handed out like confetti I don't care about. No one thinks he is British, including him, So strip it. If we're not firm on this, then the broad understanding that we will always offer consular support to our own, regardless of views, will fall apart. We should do the same to those who do not integrate, contribute, and commit heinous crimes. The powers exist, they sit with the Home Secretary, use them. Suppose it's not a mistake that he follows me. And Nick Timothy said the same thing. Also has been very excellent on the corruption in the Home Office, the presence of Islam in our country, and the need to denaturalise and deport people. Nick just says, Jack is right, we urgently need a different approach to citizenship, stop handing it out like confetti, strip it of those who wish and do us harm, stop giving its privileges, voting rights, benefits, claims, more to non-citizens, show some self-respect. And even Robert Jenrick has said, revoke his citizenship and deport. Now, Jenrick is in a difficult position because he obviously wants to lead the Conservative Party, but the donors are still delusionally behind Kemi. However, Jenrick's wife is Jewish. The Board of Deputies will probably support Jenrick, especially if they're going on a more hardline rhetorical campaign against anti-white racism and against third world migration. And so he's got a bit of wind in his sails, but the problem with Jenrick is that he's still got the anchor dragging along the seabed of the fact that he was an immigration minister during the last Conservative government, and he supported the Afghan resettlement scheme, which brought thousands of sex offenders and potential Taliban terrorists into our country. So Jenrick might not be the man to lead the charge. Has a good team around him, has lots of loyal, solid MPs like Nick Timothy and Katie Lamb around him, but it's not enough to rescue the reputation of the Conservative Party from 14 years of failure and agitating for the likes of El-Fattah to come into our country with, at best, not doing the due diligence of examining his publicly available anti-white social media posts. So who's the alternative? Well, Rupert Lowe understands all of this. He says, this awful Egyptian should have his British citizenship stripped from him and then be removed from our country, along with thousands and thousands of others. Remigration. The first MP to call for it. Islamist extremist dual nationals should have their British citizenship stripped away from them, and then they should be deported. Islam, it's cleaner. This is not complicated. This should be done as many times as necessary. If that's thousands, that's thousands. If it's hundreds of thousands, it's hundreds of thousands. It's going to be millions. If they've given up their other citizenship in an attempt to remain in Britain, we must urgently explore how that can be reversed. We have leverage, let's use it. Let's get these savages out of our country, whatever it takes. And the way we can do this, as Rupert recognises, is we have immense leverage over countries like Pakistan, force them to accept their deported illegals and criminals, foreign aid gone, diplomatic ties cut, remittances taxed, tariffs enforced, visas suspended, and we will have the support of the American State Department in doing it. We have the power. Rupert says let's use it. So do I. And this is why there's a feeling in the air that it's not just enough to deal with illegal migration or small boat migrants. It's not just enough to deport foreign criminals or just ban the Muslim Brotherhood. It's time to get serious about cultural incompatibilities, to recognise that just having British citizenship does not make you a good person, does not make you compatible, does not mean you integrate or assimilate, and it does not make you as indistinguishably British as the native population. All of these realisations are being forced to the fore by the likes of both myself and a bunch of other people that are doing the good work in making this idea unavoidable in discourse. And so this is why, according to the Financial Times, one of the words of the last year was remigration. And Stephen Bush, who obviously has no ulterior motive or anything else motivating his reasoning, says the idea that ethnic diversity is a threat has begun to seep into the mainstream. Well, if statements like this are the inevitable consequence of ethnic diversity, then I think ethnic diversity has had its day. I think it's long since time that we reversed the multicultural appeasement settlement and the mass migration experiment that has been run unwanted and at our expense for decades now. And whether or not we reverse that settlement, we're going to be called racist by these types who admit that they hate white people. So it's not just El-Fattah that needs to be returned to his country of origin. It's millions of other people that just don't belong here and don't like us either.